What is marketing? It's about seeing and meeting the needs of the consumer base, and the consumer base is diverse.
Yeah.
And it's diverse not only psychologically, which is what are the motivations with each one of us about the desire, the push to buy, but also our identity, our demographics. Great marketers understand that they got to meet the consumer at that intersection of the psychology and the demographics.
Yeah.
Marketers always say, go where the growth is. Well, this is where the growth is.
87% of the time, you will be interacting with somebody who is at their core demographically different than yourself. So for example, I identify as a Filipina, identify as a female. I have never had a Filipina female physician. Never. I've had a Filipina female pediatric physician for my children because I had to go far and wide. So from a healthcare perspective, that actually impacts things like your show-up rate, the amount of time that you talk to your physician, the amount of things that you share with your physicians, and actually it eventually does impact your medical outcome and your morbidity rate. At the go-to-market space, it's from the development and conceptualization of the product all the way to the go-to-market and picking who your market is. We were so excited about this menopause product, and all of a sudden, they had 5 men walk onto the main stage. So these 5 men, I know it's like, I caught you off guard. What we had promised them is 9 patients in the first quarter. We had 99 patients in the first quarter.
There was much more than that.
Yeah.
And it was explosive, and they generated billions of dollars. This is not for the faint of heart, especially in these polarized days. But welcome to another episode of Disrupt the Podcast with your hosts, Andrés
And Eloiza Domingo.
where we challenge conventional wisdom and we look at the things that are shaping our future.
Absolutely. And in this episode, Andres, we're going to be talking about the disruption of go-to-market. So let's just start there. Let's just talk about the market, okay? And
What about the market?
Yeah, when I think about the market, I think a lot about either the economic case or really the buying power. So I'm forgive me, I'm actually going to go through some stats, which I think is amazing. So, there are various segments of the market, and all of our market is really this multi-trillion dollar, buying power of the United States. Multicultural individuals, which are Hispanic, Black, Asian American, their buying power is in the $5.4 trillion, dollars. LGBTQ is actually a really growing market at 1.4 trillion globally, 3.9 trillion. And actually one thing that's interesting, Andres, about the LGBTQ population that research shows is that once you grab that market or you secure that market, that LGBTQ market is actually one of the most sustainable markets, meaning that once they like your brand, the LGBTQ population likes your brand, is buying and investing in your brand, they will actually stay with your brand.
It's loyalty.
Yes, thank you. Loyalty.
Same is true actually for the Latino market.
Oh, interesting.
That's right.
Thank you for saying that. People with disabilities, in the $13 trillion, globally. So the point is that there's so much buying power in what we would call, kind of global markets or multicultural markets. But Andres, why does that even matter?
Well, and why is it disruptive? Because these numbers are eye-popping.
They are.
But the disruption is that these are the markets that are being ignored. The traditional market, which is not diverse, more homogeneous.
Yeah.
Obviously has its own purchasing power.
Yeah.
But, capitalism and economics and corporations are really about growth. Yeah. And you kind of win or lose, live or die on the basis of your ability to grow.
Yeah.
And the way you grow is by expanding your consumer and client base.
Yeah.
And so the disruption here is, why is it that today still, companies and organizations, product providers and service providers are still overlooking these numbers that marketers always say, go where the growth is. Well, this is where the growth is. So, I don't really care if there's an assault on D&I as it relates to the work. Despite the assault on diversity, equity, inclusion, these numbers do not change.
No,
and in
they
fact,
don't.
the numbers show that there is greater diversity. And while there's a lot to address and combat and be watchful in terms of the ways in which diversity, equity, inclusion has been attacked, in terms of workforce and leadership development and things like that. But despite all that noise and all that strum and agony, the marketplace that is growing is driven by that very diversity. That's the disruption we cannot lose sight of that.
Absolutely. Well, so let me ask you a question. You said that even, and I agree with you, and the statistics show it, even still, these are not the markets that are being targeted or optimized on. Why do you think
Underserved.
that is? Underserved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think because, things have momentum. And you go back a few generations when the decision makers were not very diverse. They saw the market through their own lenses. They sold to people that looked like them, or they thought that people that didn't look like them at least thought like them.
Yeah.
And you had, madmen, in Madison Avenue, making decisions, and even the marketing people for women's wear were men, right? I mean, it was that extreme.
Right.
And so it's as if their gender didn't matter.
Yeah.
And their race didn't matter.
Yeah.
And actually it does, because what is marketing? It's about seeing and meeting the needs of the consumer base, and the consumer base is diverse.
Yeah.
Right? And it's diverse not only psychologically, which is what are the motivations with each one of us gives us the desire, the push to buy, but also our identity, our demographics.
Yeah.
And there's a concept called psychographics, which marries the psychology of each one of us, which is very individual.
Yeah.
Do we buy for prestige? Do we buy for necessity? Do we buy for fashion? Do we buy for utility? These are the psychological makeup. But then you combine that with the demographics, which is tied to the statistics you wrote about these multicultural markets.
Right.
And great marketers understand that they got to meet the consumer at that intersection of the psychology and the demographics.
Yeah. I want to underline, though, I want to go back and underline this idea of homogeneity, and that interception of homogeneity in thinking in teams, but still trying to get to this multicultural market. I'll tell a story. So when I was in pharmaceuticals, one of the pharmaceutical groups that I worked with, they were highlighting or working on a product for menopause. So menopause doesn't happen in men, it happens in women. And interestingly, and this was not that long ago, the team the R&D team, which is the research and development team, so this is the team that develops the product, puts together the product, and works with the marketing team to get it to market. They introduced this R&D team to in kind of an all team town hall, all company town hall. We were so excited about this menopause product, and all of a sudden they had 5 men walk onto the main stage. So these 5 men, I know it's like I caught you off guard.
Yeah.
So 5
what
men.
The disrupt?
What the disrupt?
Yeah.
What the disrupt? So 5 men walk on, and I remember this is a big. For those of you who come from sales spaces or product launch cycles, that when you're launching a product, you're launching the concept of a product. It usually is a pretty big deal. So at least for us, we had strobe lights, and we had this is when everybody was in person. So everyone's kind of waiting, and we're like, woo, who's going to be the team that leads? The menopause product were 5 men. And not only that, Andres, but 5 white men. The thing is that I come from a space of health equity, menopause plus health equity. The number one female population of color, female population that has the worst menopause symptoms, meaning longevity as well as severity of symptoms, is actually African American women. The next one is Hispanic women. The next one is white, and then the next one is Asian American. And so even from that perspective, coming up with a menopause drug, and you have 5 white men. So it is interesting to me when we talk about this whole concept of go to market. Really, let's just define that the go to market space. And correct me if I'm wrong. It's from the development and conceptualization of the product all the way to the go to market and picking who your market is.
Well, and actually, let's add some more examples. There's plenty of examples of misses.
Yeah.
Of not getting. You gave it one example.
Yeah.
And then there's some long-standing examples that have gone into the folklore of missing the mark on cross-cultural dexterity. And one of them is in Latin America, when Chevy launched the Nova car. And, and they really figured out why it wasn't selling because it was such good economy car.
I was going to say it was economic, yeah.
Yeah, very economic, and it seemed like a good one for the Latin American market. Until some astute person realized that Nova means
don't go.
It doesn't
no
go.
go. It doesn't go.
It doesn't go, right? But beyond that, I think those folkloric anecdotes are a little bit more on the superficial side. There's some more profound things. And one example that I'm very familiar with is the fact that I was at Hewitt Associates many years ago, and Hewitt really helped with retirement financial management plans for in the U.S. market, which is where you encourage people to employees set aside part of their earnings for saving for their retirement. But the data showed that even when people earn the same amount of money, people of color, Latino and Black in particular, the Asian group was a different dynamic, actually underparticipated in those plans. Saved if they participated, they saved at a lower rate, and there were a bunch of other different behaviors, and why was that? And then we worked with the people that sell retirement planning, and they said, yeah, we have the same issue. We're trying to sell to high net worth people, Latino and African American, and we're seeing that they're not buying, even though we assumed that because they're high net worth, they would see the value of it.
Yeah.
And so when we pulled on the cross-cultural thread, and which required cross-cultural agility, there's some worldview differences. If you ask in anthropological studies and sociological study, what does long-term mean? For middle-class whites, long-term means the next generation.
That's right.
For many Asians, it meant the next century.
Yep, right.
But for Latinos, it meant the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to motivate to do long-term savings,
Yep.
Just that different time horizon changes. That's number one. Number two, worldviews matter. If for a worldview rooted in Latino Catholic fatalism, where Dios quiere, God willing, que será será, what will be, is the mindset. That el hombre propone, pero Dios dispone. The human proposes, but it's God who disposes.
Yeah, wow.
That this concept that I can do something today to control my destiny financially in the future, so it goes counter to this concept that está fuera de mis manos, is out of my hands.
Wow.
So how to solve this? I mean, now we have a diagnosis, but a cross-culture dexterous person, right, working on what you refer to as culture innovation. I want to hear more about that from you.
Yep.
Is one to say, okay, we ask the question, is there a gap? And there is a gap. Many times they don't ask the question, so we know there's a gap. Now we have to understand why. I just gave it the fatalistic aspect, but now we have to close the gap.
Yeah.
And the closing the gap was like the following. If you think of a typical wealth management, long-term savings advertisement, it usually looks like a couple walking on the beach,
Yep.
right? Maybe a Labrador next to them, right? And usually white.
Right.
And then you say, well, what's the cultural dexterity issue? Oh, it's a white couple. Let's make it black.
Yeah.
So they do that. And then, or it's Latino couple. Let's say, saving for mañana. Put a little language thing in it. But that misses the whole point of the worldview, which is for a more communal culture.
Yeah.
A picture of a couple by themselves walking down the beach, it's not a desirable future.
Yeah.
In fact, the Latino consumer is going to say, pobrecitos, poor them, they're all alone.
Right. I was going to say they're all alone. Where's the family? Where are the grandchildren?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the marketing that starts to work then? What is the picture of the future that would be appealing?
I would say the sitting at the kitchen making food with your grandchildren and having your kids around you. Lots of people.
Multi-generational, right? That's the life. I want to have a multi-generation in my older age where I'm surrounded.
That's amazing.
And so I'm like, now, do you want that? Let's talk about financial
That's
planning.
amazing.
Right? So that's a good example. So,
I love that.
So tell us, I mean, you've coined the phrase culture innovation as it relates to some of this work, and kind of walk us through that. What does that look like?
You talked earlier, Andrés, about I love what you said is despite some of the changes in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion, yet there are certain things that still exist, and that's why I think culture innovation works. So I'll just tell you in terms of a story. Many people know that I was at Johns Hopkins Medicine at a time, and prior to my joining Johns Hopkins Medicine as their deputy officer for diversity, we had a long-standing, when I say we, Hopkins had this 40-year, actually more than that, probably 42-year history, 45-year history of transphobic behavior, insofar as we were actually leading the way and influencing the thoughts around transgender people as humans, and therefore how they receive rights, and then particularly transgender people as patients and how they are cared for. And so, we had very strong leadership, particularly in the psychology department, that believed that transgender individuals were joking, if I could say it that way. They weren't, they were really this idea of gender dysphoria, meaning there was really something wrong with them, mentally. And this really wasn't this physical nature of it, And so when I was there, also, Baltimore has a very high murder rate in total. So, but what we noticed is at that time, the number one target population for murders, particularly gun violence, was transgender women of color, transgender Black women, actually. So what would happen is we would save their lives. Johns Hopkins Medicine, we had a really great emergency room. We still do. It's a trauma one bay. People would come in. We would save their lives, take the bullets out of them, stitch them up, and send them out, on their way. But the thing is that Hopkins, being Hopkins, we really believe in birth to life, what we would call pediatrics to geriatrics. But with transgender individuals, we weren't doing that. We were saving their lives and then sending them somewhere else to the tune of millions of dollars, because transgender individuals, first of all, there wasn't a lot of insurance companies that were paying for gender affirming care, endocrinology, speech path, OB-GYN, support for transgender individuals. So while we were saving their life, which is usually a pay out of pocket for emergency services, they were going somewhere else for all of their other care. And I said, first of all, Hopkins, we are a anchor institution in Baltimore. We are a major employer in Baltimore. We are also a major, of course, Johns Hopkins Medicine and Baltimore kind of go hand in hand. We are the pinnacle, of kind of the neighborhood, but yet we're not serving the target murder victims. And I honestly, Andres, I come from doctors, so I thought, I'm going to pull on the heartstrings. And they said, no, I'm not really that interested in that market. I'm not interested in that gap. You have not identified a gap for us. Okay, that's fine. Heartstring didn't work. So then I went and I said, I found two things. Number one, I figured out how much money we were losing, because for every transgender individuals that was going somewhere else, UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, any of the other University of Maryland to get transgender care services, the amount of money that they were losing was X that they were paying out versus coming over to us. That was number one. Number two, we also found out that there was a transgender affirming care center in New York that was actually going to close. And so New York is not that far from Baltimore, and they had a huge patient population, which we could have actually attracted over to Baltimore. So that was two markets that we were missing out on, quantifiably and economically, and really also reputation-wise. But again, the reputation thing did nothing to move the decision makers. And so I presented, that data to Hopkins and said, well, this is how much money you're losing. This is how, and you actually have a transgender center that's going to close about X miles away from you. We could actually attract them here. And I was actually talking to some of those patients, and they said positively, if Hopkins opened a transgender affirming care center, we would go. And Hopkins said, okay, fine. You can open up a small line of service, what we call patient flow, for transgender patients at Hopkins and just see how it goes. What we had promised them is 9 patients in the first quarter. We had 99 patients in the first quarter.
No. An extra 9 in there, right?
That's right. Add the other 9. So the point is that, to your point, Andres, looking at the market and who are we not serving, there was not dexterity in how it is that we were actually thinking about this market and thinking about them from an economic, capitalistic, but also really from an anchor, kind of institution lens. The culture innovation comes like this. The outcome was innovation, but the culture of Hopkins has subsequently then changed because we are bringing in this whole new market. We had to teach everybody different ways to handle transgender patients. I mean, everything from EPIC, pronouns and EPIC, which is the medical, records, all the way to how, we're moving the safety of our patients and those kinds of things. So as you innovate, you actually change your culture. Often from a DEI lens, it kind of goes the other way. You're changing your culture, and then as a result of that, your customers or your market changes. My argument is that through culture innovation, you're actually focusing on your market, optimizing on your market, giving them the products and services that they need in the way that they need them, just as you described, and your culture shifts.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, that's remarkable process, right? That you tie in this multicultural market, this underserved,
Yeah.
which is that must be disrupt. That concept has to be disrupted
Yeah.
for companies to grow.
Yeah.
And the disruption also is for all the attack the D&I is in, that it's the diverse marketplace is going to really be what's going to save companies in terms of their goals. So, we got to turn this whole thing upside down.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then you're also making the case that culture innovation is indeed about strategically understanding where the growth is, and the cultural dexterity is the skill set that is required
Absolutely.
to go after it. And so let's talk about the skill set that is required. Anybody, the whole thing of cultural dexterity is not just to have a workforce where, people of this background only sell to this people background.
Right.
Cultural dexterity implies that you can, no matter what your background is, you can sell to someone with a different background, but you have to learn the skill to see them and understand that many of their values and motivators or psychographics are going to be different than yours. So what does that say for the importance of a diverse workforce?
Yeah, and I want to
And inclusive.
Yeah, and inclusive, and I want to broaden it because you're right. I think oftentimes when people think of the term diversity, they think about, like as you mentioned, demographics, and that's certainly important. As I mentioned earlier, I opened with this concept of having individuals who, with the menopause drug, menopause is a symptom of women that women go through, and yet you have males who are doing this. Now it is not. Absolutely, there's a lot of statistics that show that representation matters. That whole thing, hashtag representation matters. But at the same time, there's also the concept that, as you note, having the skills to interact with people who are different than yourself is really what's important. I'm going to say two things. Number one, there's a statistic out there, and I use it all the time. 87% of the time, you will be interacting with somebody who is at their core demographically different than yourself. So, for example, I identify as a Filipina, I identify as a female. I have never had a Filipina female physician. Never. I've had a Filipina female pediatric physician for my children because I had to go far and wide. But for me, I've never had a Filipina female PCP or an OB-GYN. Never. And so from a healthcare perspective, that actually impacts things like your show-up rate, the amount of time that you talk to your physician, the amount of things that you share with your physicians, and actually it eventually does impact your medical outcome and your morbidity rate. And so those kinds of...
Just so that everybody understands, when you say it affects the outcome, how does it what is the outcome that gets affected?
Yeah, so the outcome that gets... Well, so I'll talk about it globally here. If I have a Filipina female physician, somebody that looks like me, talks like me, or I feel as if they understand me more, I'm going to be more open to talking to them. I'm going to take the time to actually tell them things. We often in healthcare, we would find that if there was a discrepancy between the patient and the care provider, whether it was a white male who was talking to Arabic families or Arab families, it was not uncommon that the Arab families would look at this white male out of hierarchy and authoritarianism and say, yes, I took all the medicine, but they broke the pills in half because they were also using some sort of other, they were drinking tea along with it and saying, that's not what grandma said. Grandma said, take half and then do this. And so the trust is broken down. The rate of conversation, actually, being able to talk openly and share openly without judgment is broken down. And of course, that impacts your medical outcome and it can eventually, impact your morbidity.
Well, and actually the statistics show to that point, what is the cumulative effect of that? That people from different racial ethnic groups end up coming back to the hospital more often, more quickly. They can have even greater number of amputations and other interventions compared to whites.
Yep. They stay longer in inpatient than their counterparts.
Exactly. And they and the morbidity rates are higher.
Yep, that's right.
And here's the thing, even when it's same hospital,
Right.
same department.
Right. Right.
And so this, what you're talking about, the cultural innovation and the ability to be cultural dexterity, is actually a life and death issue.
It is. Oh, 100%. It's absolutely life and death issue. You know, one of the things that we faced, and I know I'm heavily going into healthcare because this is really where for me it showed up a lot, is, you know, we have a very small percentage of individuals in the what's the field, Andres, where you look at skin?
Dermatology?
Thank you, dermatology. There is actually a very small percentage in dermatology of people of color, particularly African American physicians who go into dermatology and then specialize in dermatology. So that's actually really interesting. So oftentimes what people will say is, oh, I need a black physician because I have black skin or I have melatonin-rich skin. What's interesting is actually you don't. And this is a really good example of cultural dexterity. Many physicians that are out there who do not identify as melatonin rich or a person of color have learned a lot about what a pimple would look like on my face versus your face, or like my son's faces who are very light, very fair complected. And so there is also that double-edged sword around, I really want someone who looks like me, but interestingly, there actually aren't a lot of individuals in dermatology. This is also why cultural dexterity is so critical.
Yeah, and let me now turn the dial and talk about some really positive stories where some big organizations got it. And one of them was Marriott, and I had a chance many years ago to work with Marriott. And they had a long history of being a leading organization on workforce diversity. And when I started working with them, I brought up the fact that we're bringing up here. It's like, well, workforce diversity, great. How do you have it? How do you have more diversity at every level of the organization? But how much have you thought about the diversity of your guests? And at the time, this was, many years ago, it really had not entered the diversity conversation. But as soon as it was brought up and surfaced, there was a great deal of excitement because their strategic minds started going. They started thinking about, because Marriott originally, U.S.-based hospitality company started by members of the Latter-day Saints
I don't know if
in
I knew
Utah.
that. Yeah.
Had sort of the Marriott look, the Marriott experience. And as U.S. businesses started to then go international, at the time not even global, the premise of Marriott International originally was to give a home away from home for these white middle-class businessmen as they went around the world, and they wanted them to have something familiar. So originally Marriott was very homogeneous in its extension around the world on purpose to meet the needs of their primary business traveler.
Okay.
But that was way back when.
Yeah.
So, and they were trying to adapt more, but it hadn't really become a full-fledged strategy until this conversation happened, and said, how are you addressing the diversity of the marketplace in a variety of ways? Number one, it was a time when the BRIC countries of Brazil, Russia, India, and China were growing their own multinationals, and they were sending now expats or business people to do sales in the U.S. How are you catering to that business traveler from these different countries if their Marriott hotels is just catering to white Americans?
Yeah.
And then within the United States, if you're catering to, inadvertently, by default, to white Americans, how are you addressing the business and the pleasure needs of the African American community, Latino community, the LGBT community? And that began a revolution inside Marriott, which then they took it and expanded it into a campaign called #LoveTravels. And they developed a series of ads and marketing geared to those different demographics. And and because of the culture innovation and the culture dexterity, it wasn't just putting blackface, if you will, on white ads. It was really getting to the heart of the messaging.
Wow.
So tuning into the fact that in the African American community, the tradition of big, family gatherings, right, and family reunions was a big deal. And really catering to that. And that was a new concept for Marriott to really understand and market to that. With the LGBT community, they didn't just say they were, gay friendly, but they understood that there's a lot of diversity in the gay community. So young gay men, young single lesbian women, gay families, right? You know, older gay couples,
Yeah.
right? So that in itself is a vast diversity. And so their marketing on LGBTQ wasn't just a simplistic gay-friendly
Right.
same-sex couple holding hands,
Right.
but it was much more than that.
Yeah.
And it was explosive, and it generated billions of dollars for them.
Yeah.
And now they have dropped the hashtag Love Travels campaign, as a major thing, because it's now so ingrained
Yeah.
in how they go to
Yeah.
market that
Yeah.
it's just simply marketing.
And that's what culture innovation is about. You know, one thing, Andres, that I want to note here, it's interesting when you were talking about that, is I immediately thought about risk, actually. You know, as I want to acknowledge that, you know, as companies choose to open up their products and services to markets that they may have not targeted or looked at, before, African American, LGBTQ in particular. I'm just going to stay there. You are taking a risk, whatever risk you think that is. I'm saying that just because I want to acknowledge it. You know, I'll give an example. Several years ago, I think it was like in the 1980s, early 1980s, Campbell's Soup, which is a traditional, that is the, Campbell's Soup of America. It's also a really easy soup to get to. It's low cost. It was accessible, and it was Campbell's, for goodness sake. In the 1980s, they came out with a Super Bowl ad where they had a dad feeding his son Campbell's soup, and he would say, Luke, his name was Luke, Luke, I am your father, and he would feed the son the soup. And then you would hear off camera, but then the camera would pan, Luke, I am your father too. And it was a second dad. And that was the whole ad that came out during the Super Bowl. And as a result of that, Campbell's got hammered. I mean, you can imagine, right? And of course they lost stock. Of course they lost, but that was a massive risk that they took, a calculated risk that they took at the time, and unapologetically took that risk at the Super Bowl of all places, But so I want to acknowledge that.
So this is not for the faint of heart, especially in these polarized days. But the payoff for Marriott was in the billions.
Yeah. Yeah.
The downside for Bud Light was reputation on their brand.
Right.
So your point about culture innovation, requiring cross-cultural dexterity is important, and it has to be rooted in the why. You have to understand the market, the size of the market, what the upside is, and you have the capability. And you have to have the people. And I want to then now address head-on the assault on diverse workforce. The assault on diverse workforce has big implications on the ability to win in the marketplace. And we've been making that case all along.
Absolutely.
So as we look at the diverse workforce, you need a diverse workforce to be able to match the marketplace out there. And you need everybody, including white males, to be cultural, dexterous people to understand the marketplace they got to reach.
Absolutely.
So, for all the assaults on D&I, we got to sort of triple down on the fact that this is a business issue as well.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think that's a really good place right there, Andres. We always promise our listeners that we're going to have a disruptive conversation and really kind of pick apart a topic, but we also promise that we're going to have practical takeaways. And that's what we call Disrupt GPS. And so I would, for me, Andres, the biggest takeaways for me for this conversation around the disruption of go-to-market is what you talked about is this this idea of understanding the values. I really love this juxtaposition that you've pointed out in a number of ways using great case studies of this. Absolutely, you can, come up with a really cute ad and come up with a way to do this new poster, and write it in Spanish. That's one way to do it, or you could actually dig a little bit deeper and understand the values of your market. What are the gaps between what you're doing now and what you're doing, what they would pay attention, what they value, not what you value, but what they value, and making that attachment to your product or your service. I think that that takes a little bit more time. It takes a lot of, like you said, cultural dexterity. It takes a lot of humility. It takes research, and that's my second takeaway. That to Andres' point and to my point, these are all calculated decisions, like any business decision. Andres said it earlier. This is a part of your business, this is a part of your operations. All parts of business and all parts of operations should be and need to be calculated. In the same way, this, going towards market, looking at what your gaps are in market, and then formulating your services and your products to be innovative and competitive is a calculated move. Understanding the risk, understanding the benefits. And, to your point, this idea of, is this really performative? Is this just something we're putting together? Or is this something that we've actually built over time so that we're in a space where we can go to market now? So those are my two takeaways. Andres, what about you?
Well, I want to go back to the statistics you read at the beginning.
Yeah.
And for all the D&I champions out there, whether you're in that role or have been an ally, the most powerful way to combat the attack in D&I is to mention $5.4 trillion of purchasing power combined of the Hispanic, Black, and Asian American, LGBTQ, $1.4 trillion in the United States. People with disability, which includes family and friends globally, $13 trillion, $2.5 trillion in the United States alone. So an assault on our civil rights, an assault on our right to be represented in the workforce at every level, at leadership, has to be defended on a variety of different fronts. But right now, the civil rights argument is that much more under assault. The right, for the right reasons and the moral reasons, are being under assault and being attacked, even under court of law. Mm-hmm. But the place that, in a capitalist environment, that we can stand solidly mm-hmm. and actually defy the attacks and D&Is, to say the marketplace is very diverse, growing. It's where the growth is. And the future of American companies lies in its ability to not forget the diverse marketplace out there. Mm-hmm. And in that, to achieve and meet the diverse marketplace, you need a diverse workforce.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, we had a really great conversation today about the disruption of go-to-market, and we ask that you, again, continue to be here on the Disrupt, the podcast, and we have a lot more to talk about.
Yeah. See you next time. Bye. Ciao.
Bye.